listening to Awake in Relationship, a podcast about intimacy, community, and culture in a time of great change, with Silas Rose.
Hello and welcome to Awake in Relationship. My name is Silas Rose. Thanks to the star power of Oprah and other influencers, millions of people around the world have been introduced to the power of mindfulness meditation and compassion practices. In many ways, mindfulness has become the new yoga for spiritual seekers. And despite an emphasis on self-liberation and the end of suffering, many Western meditation communities have failed to look inward and address their own systemic biases. In this episode, I will chat with Farheen HaQ, artist, activist, and Dharma teacher, about some of the barriers she's encountered on the path. We will also talk about the Sweet Refuge Sangha, a meditation community started by Farheen and others for people of color. Please stay tuned. Well, Farheen, thank you so much for joining Awake in Relationship.
Thank you, Silas.
So I should mention that we are on location here in lovely James Bay, a neighborhood just on the sort of inner city of Victoria. And we have a chicken clucking in the background, which is quite lovely. So how has COVID been for you? I imagine as an artist, this can be a very creative time, or it could also be a very lonely time.
Yeah, this time I've been spending with my family, so and the chickens. For me, it's been interesting because I tend to do my studio work where I'm actually kind of bringing work together when my kids are at school and my partner is doing his work. And so I really take kind of the downtime and that quiet time in the home to build my work and to give it form. And so this has been a challenging time, as it has, I think, for many parents, where there is constant activity and change and negotiations and, endless opportunities for caretaking, where I've really had to carve out the time intentionally to make space to have my creative practice. The research and the material for my work is always happening. And even prior to COVID, what I've been interested in exploring are the material of my relationships. And in fact, a big body of work that I did a few years ago was all around my relationship to my home space and how the work that happens in the private spaces of our homes often don't get shared outside in the public realm. And and here I am 5 months into this intense time of being at home with my family. And just in the last couple months, that's when I've really kind of buckled down and made time to kind of give form. I've just finished a video and I've had a couple of shoots. But the first few months of quarantine, I found all I could do was just kind of keep my own ground and be present for my family and take care of myself. And I didn't really find that I had a lot of space for actually making. I mean, there were the way that I like to make. There was the bread making that happened, and there was, lots of hiking, and there was lots of creative practice that, for me, was very family oriented, but it wasn't the kind of deeper work that I like to get into. I think I had to find my own ground in quarantine. It's only now after four months that I was able to begin that.
Many people describe this experience at this time as kind of like living in a pressure cooker. It's very similar to kind of being in retreat, actually.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I think if we're have the privilege of being housed and fed and employed, then I absolutely feel like this has been a retreat time. And in fact, right near the beginning of quarantine, I was sitting with a few teachers, and they really brought forward this invitation of like, okay, all the work that you've done on retreat prepares you for the work of going inward, being with oneself. And, that time when everyone was kind of freaking out about, I can't see anybody, I have to stay at home. I remember my Anushka Fernandopoulos, who's a Dharma teacher that I sit with online and have sat in retreat with. She was like, okay, you can do this. She was telling all of us that you've been with yourselves. So how do we continue that practice with these, uncertain conditions of this virus spreading, and now with all the civil unrest and waking up to the racism that's around us and so pervasive? How do we continue to be with ourselves and notice what's alive and moving in my body in this moment, in this time?
One of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the podcast is we are living in a time of deep personal reflection, but also kind of cultural upheaval. And you sort of straddle those two worlds of social justice and also the kind of mindfulness work. I want to kind of dive into this conversation around sort of radical awakening. Maybe we could start with just a little bit about your background as a Muslim woman.
So yeah, I grew up on Haudenosaunee territory near Niagara Falls, and I grew up in a really tight-knit Muslim community. So I was raised with wonderful kind of really community-oriented Muslim practice, grew up praying, learning to read the Quran, and following a lot of the kind of devotional and also ceremonial practices. And the interesting thing about Islam is that it, has such a wide reach in terms of cultural locations. And so I grew up in this mosque with a really big South Asian community, folks from the African diaspora, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. And it really, I do credit my Islamic upbringing as this portal and doorway that really invited me to meditation practice. So many of the mystical Islamic practices of chanting, of nights spent in prayer. When I came upon the invitation to sit retreat, didn't feel like a far leap for me. And I actually think that my Islamic upbringing was this ground for doing meditation practice. And the way that Islam was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad was through meditation. So the Prophet would retreat into a cave and sit, and that's where the first revelation to him came, when the angel Gabriel visited him and said, read and gain knowledge and try to understand this world. That came to him after he'd sat in this cave in Hira in Saudi Arabia for days and days. So that tradition of contemplation and meditation is something that I grew up learning. It's not something that's always practiced. We get, I think like many religions, it turns dogmatic.
Yeah.
So I grew up really connected to my faith, and that social justice work for me that you bring up began for me as a teenager. So I was one of these kids that I went to Islamic school by choice until I was in grade 12. And it really formed a strong part of my identity. And I credit particularly the women and the aunties that I grew up with in the mosque as my teachers in social justice work, and as the people who kind of first politicized me. And a pivotal moment for me growing up was when I was in grade 9. The war in Bosnia was happening. And that's when I attended my first street rally and vigil. I remember making signs in the basement of my best friend's house, and her mom had said, we need to go and stand for our brothers and sisters around the world who are suffering, and we need to let people here know what's happening. And so that was laying the groundwork, when I was this young teenager. And so, and all the work of caregiving and making space and taking care of whether it's your family or others in the community, that's what I was learning.
We came of age in the 90s, which I remember as a kind of the height of Islamophobia. I'm wondering if that made an imprint on you and how that might be kind of present in your worldview and art.
Yeah, so 9/11 was a huge crack in my experience, and then the Gulf War prior to that. It was huge in that I have memories of being a young, again, a teenager, coming into adolescence in this time where I felt like so much of my strength and sense of identity came from my faith and my community, and then seeing in the mass media and the images, hearing George Bush talking about, invading people and kind of reducing communities of people to stereotypes. And, and I could see that there was such a myopic vision of, what the Muslim world is. And my experience was so rich right here in Canada, of these incredible aunties and uncles and elders and folks who were so resilient and generous, and then this kind of complete erasure and reduction of this rich community and communities that exist. And it probably did lay the groundwork for me, Silas, around that drive for me as an artist to take the representation of my experience as a Muslim and to always to challenge and to create and to complicate the images that I wanted to see of myself and of my own community. And then, a 9/11 happened, and I was in art school at the time. So I was in UVic. It was actually my first day of art school. And I was about to get on the bus and go up to campus. And I, turned on the CBC, and here was this, these Twin Towers falling in this kind of crazy event. And the ensuing Islamophobia and the kind of questions I got really put me in a place of, what does it mean for me to be a Muslim? Why is everybody asking me why they did it? It was a really hard time, complicated time. I had just moved here as well, far away from my own home community. And also navigating being in relationship with my partner who's not Muslim, who's white. And it was, needless to say, very really rich ground for source material for practice and for my creative work, that's where I work from always. It's what's alive, what's struggling, what needs to be looked at. And I kind of see my meditation, but also my creative practice as this net where it's okay, I can hold this, and how do I wrestle with this, and how do I look at it in a space that's kind and that will take care of me and work through what's coming up.
Really. So when did you begin to practice meditation more formally, and what was the sort of entry point into that?
So the entry point for me into formal meditation practice, as it looks for me now, was 14 years ago when I was pregnant with our first child, my daughter Aisha. Before that, I'd been practicing meditation and kind of self-taught. And as I was saying to you earlier, Silas, there were evenings at the mosque when I was growing up where we had Laylatul Qadr, which is a night during Ramadan where we would stay up all night and pray. And So, these practices of, durational contemplation were not new for me. So the idea of sitting in retreat and meditating for a week or 10 days, I think I was primed for that through those early experiences. But, as I was in my 20s, I had a group of friends, a few friends who were involved with IMS, Insight Meditation community, and they'd gone on retreat. And I'd always heard about it and felt drawn to it on some level, and then terrified on another, thinking, oh, do I really want to, sit in silence for a week? Because up until then, my Islamic practice was very community oriented. Mm-hmm. So there's ritual, but then there was, as a kid, I think I did it because there's a huge social aspect, and we'd talk and have pizza after we prayed all night, or, whatever. But this pregnancy really brought for me this sense that my life is about to profoundly change. And I felt this calling to go into silence and to really contemplate this change in my life, change in my body. And I think I was curious to pay some deep attention to what that experience was for me in a retreat setting. So I sat a week-long retreat with Robert Beatty from Portland Insight Meditation Society, and it was a really joyful experience. I went in scared, and the silence was this real relief, and I was able to, get really kind of touch into my monkey mind, and I just laughed at myself. And so luckily I had, some kind of kindness for myself, that I was able to really see the humor in my way of thinking. And, and I think it was just the right opening for me. And that marked the beginning for me of a real serious practice. And so that first year of having Aisha, I don't think I've actually ever been as steadfast. Maybe it was like that beginner's enthusiasm, but I had this, newborn, and I was meditating every day, every morning. It's definitely, been in flux since, but it's a pretty steadfast practice for me to study Vipassana.
So I was part of a meditation community for about 20 years that blew up on some level because of a scandal. And I as well had very positive, nurturing experiences on the cushion and off the cushion with community. I'd say as a whole, the community, people I encountered there, were very compassionate, progressive, open-minded, but also very homogenous in the sense that most of us were, white, middle class, and tend to be an older group. I assume for yourself, the Insight community might be kind of similar. What was it like to be a ritualized person in the Vipassana world?
I didn't realize how hard it was until I began to do the work and to start naming what was happening, which I think a lot of people are doing now since the murder of George Floyd and kind of the mass waking up to the systemic racism in so many different communities. I'd say, for me, I touched into it in moments, whether it was, post 9/11, really realizing, I'm often the only Muslim or the person of color in many spaces in Victoria here where I find myself. So there was this complicated way of feeling, I found this practice that I loved, and, I sat retreats, day-long retreats, or have sat evening programs with Victoria IMS, gone on retreat along the West Coast, Spirit Rock, Salt Spring Island. And there's a beautiful, homecoming to the practice. And then I look around and I see that, I do that often. I would go into a retreat or to a space and be like, oh, right, I'm one, or I'm one of two. And it's sad, but I got used to it. And then about, I'd say, 5-7 years ago, I really began naming this quality for me that was, present around the lack of racialized folks and BIPOC folks in our sanghas. And the nice thing about IMS as an institution, there is a lot of talk and effort around ensuring that the spaces are less homogenous. It doesn't always mean that in reality that is manifesting, but there have been efforts to at least name the inequities that are present. And so I had the good fortune of being able to go down to Seattle and set a retreat with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who co-authored this book called Radical Dharma. And a few of us from our Sangha here in Victoria, Sweet Refuge, read that book and went down. And it was incredible to be in the States and to be in Seattle. And there was a POC day, and then there was a mixed day, and to study with this teacher. And I remember at that weekend retreat, somebody was responding to a question and, just to check in at some point. And they're like, how is this experience for you? And they said, it's like I've been thirsty and I just didn't know. And like now I finally come to the oasis and now I'm hydrated. Like I didn't even realize I was parched. And now I'm hydrated. And that's the feeling, Silas, is that, I found myself at this watering hole. Like previously, like being in a Sangha is wonderful. It meets a need. And then when I am in spaces where there's diverse, the whole spectrum of experience, whether it's, BIPOC, queer, different abilities, it's like, I really feel hydrated and nourished. Like there was something missing all along. And that's certainly the case. And, Victoria has its own set of, what's the word? Like conditions. It's like, whether it's the size, but it also has this interesting mentality of, I think we're just a careful kind of, this is a broad swath that I'm painting here, but kind of the communities, whether it's the art community or meditation, there's caution or care. Like, I think folks sometimes are afraid to get political. And I found it hard to find a space where I could be fully hydrated, like I'm saying. And there were a few of us, and a dear friend of mine, Gagan Lika, and I, had lots of conversations about this. And so we're like, okay, we're gonna have to create it, And so whether we created Brown Drinks, which is like this social networking space for BIPOC folks, or Sweet Refuge Sangha, which now has this kind of core organizing committee of 5 of us, but we were like, we need to create this space so that people can come and feel really nourished in their practice in this way.
Right. And so that was the genesis of Sweet Refuge?
Yeah. Sweet Refuge Sangha was a few friends who came together, who we got together and, we were talking about how we often go on retreat and we're the only brown person, So for some reason it just happened or even if the 3 or 4 of us went on retreat together, we were the 3 or 4 folks of color. And so we're like, what would it be like to just have this safe space where we can practice as racialized folks? And that's when we went to this retreat together with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, and we began just sitting in our living rooms, and it's been this really rich, incredible space. And particularly during the pandemic, we've we've been meeting online. We were just poised to host our first retreat. We were bringing up a teacher from San Francisco, and that was supposed to be in April. So that had to be canceled, but we were able to do that online, and we've continued to sit. And in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and just that huge kind of ground shifting in those really painful first few weeks that were just so just rocking, like just rocked everybody. The space of Street Refuge Sangha was so integral, I know, for so many of us. And, you know, we saw so many new folks coming in to find a space to just be and sit together with other Black and Indigenous and folks of color.
So it's a bit of an open question, kind of based on my experiences in my own spiritual community. But I'm wondering how, or if, spiritual traditions like Buddhism can coexist with a social justice agenda.
I think it's such an important question and kind of entry into a way of thinking, because for me, Dharma and meditation practice is social justice work. So the endeavor to wake up, I don't want, you know, so many of us come to meditation to feel better or to, you know, calm our minds or make friends with ourselves. But, you know, the real work, you know, especially if we're in this for liberation, which most of us are, if we're feeling bad and we're suffering, we want to be liberated from that suffering. But, you know, that the liberatory framework of Dharma, what's happening internally is happening externally. And what's happening externally is happening internally. So, you know, in my body, it might look like, and in my mind, it might look like, oh, I'm worried about, you know, paying the bill or this relationship with my dad said this, or he did this when I was younger and I'm still processing this. But all of that happened, you know, I'll take the example of work with my father. Well, you know, whatever I'm working through, whether it's, you know, the domestic violence I grew up with, or the perfectionism that was kind of really drummed into me. Though, what are the conditions that were the grounds for that? Well, there's, you know, the racism, there is the dislocation, there's, you know, that resulted from my dad and living in a refugee camp for months, and, you know, the pressure on him, like the work of my kind of intimate relationships, the ground for those is the world context. And so I don't see a separation, and I don't think the Dharma sees a separation around the external world and the internal world. And that's one of the concepts that I love, but I remember at the beginning really grappling with the kind of the ultimate reality and the relative reality, and that we can't have, you know, we can't be in the ultimate realm, the realm of liberation and knowing our oneness without the experience of the self. And for me, there's this real similarity in, you know, the personal work and the work of the world and the work of social justice. You know, Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams says, without interchange, there can be no outer change. And we are not working for liberation. Like, you cannot be liberated by yourself. That's not how it works. It's not like one person gets in, but that's part of I think the framework and philosophy of capitalism and white supremacy is that just get first in line and get up there, and then we'll get there. But that's a fallacy. You know, there can't be liberation for one person. It's all of us or none of us. Because if we're somewhere by ourselves, that's not the true nature of reality. Someone else is suffering, and I think this is what people are waking up to right now with, and there's so many teachers that I feel so indebted to for like teaching me this framework and that I've been really inspired by. But when I read their work, I was like, right, this is what I am aiming for. I want to feel better. I want to feel liberated. And I need to do this in relationship and with and for all the people and all the beings that I live with here on this planet.
Well, it's such a big question. Well, what can be done in terms of inviting greater diversity within the mindfulness space?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm finding is I think the work begins with ourselves. So, like, I know everyone's saying, what can I do? What can I do? And I'm not saying we don't need to change and better our communities, our meditation communities. But before we do the, implementing policy or change, like my big ask in the last in the last month or so has been, particularly to my white friends and family, has been really sit with this, like this question, like, but, what do I do? And what's underneath that? Like when you realize that there is a mass inequity and that systemic racism has been reverberating through every institution and every organization, what does that bring up for you, number one? How are you implicated? How have we all been complicit and benefited from systemic racism, colorism, classism, ableism? And from that place really work. Like, I think we all need to get really tender and vulnerable. The place that feels challenging for me is when we get right into fix-it mode, and as though, that's an external problem that I need to fix. And that it's just, if we just get a few more racialized folks in here, we're great. And that is, that completely misses the point, because it's, as we were talking earlier, like these systems of oppression course through each and every one of us. So there's some great teachers and great resources out there. And I know that so many organizations are wanting to implement changes. But, there's a lot of white awake resources. Listening to other teachers, for me, teachers that have been instrumental in holding myself during these really painful times have been Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, Lama Rod Owens, Ruth King, who I've sat with and is an incredible teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, Larry Yang. And I'm sure there's countless others, but those are teachers that I've been, Spring Washam, Anushka Fernandopoul, all who are mostly I Am Insight meditation teachers. And the invitation from them has been to really, begin with ourselves, hold ourselves in kindness, and I don't say this like, do your work and what does it bring up for you, in this sense of like, get in touch with your pain, but also, that's the beautiful thing about meditation practice, like when the Dalai Lama says my religion is kindness, that's what I love, that there's mindfulness can bring this really friendly, kind way of encountering ourselves, even the really painful aspects of ourselves. I was just listening to a Dharma talk by Tuere Sala, who is a Black teacher from Seattle Insight. And she's come up to Victoria a few times. And she was talking about how, as parents, when our kids are learning to walk, and they're falling all the time, we might put little cushions or just, we let them fall, but then we pick them up really, joyfully and kindly and just keep going. And she likened, meditation practice, but particularly like metta, or even aspects of mudita, like joy and loving kindness, as these cushions that really hold our practice and then like lift us up. And I thought that was such a beautiful metaphor. And I was like, right, because that's one of the things that's been really profoundly helpful for me in my practice is working with all the painful stuff, whether it's, in my own family or working with the pain of racism or, hard moments with my kids. It's coming back to the cushion or even daily life practice with this kind awareness is just so key. And I think that kind awareness while we work through this hard stuff of structural change and systemic change is critical. And that's such a beautiful tool that the Dharma offers us.
That's joining the head and heart. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And this is the thing, we can't figure this stuff out in our heads. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love also about, embodied practice and about the Dharma. It's like, it's a somatic experience and it needs to be infused with kindness and loving attention.
Well, that's probably a great place to land. Farheen, thank you so much. And how can people find out about you, your art, and also the Sweet Refuge Sangha?
Well, if you're interested in looking at some of my work and seeing how Dharma influences my practice, you can check out www.farheenhaq.com. And for Sweet Refuge Sangha, if you Google Sweet Refuge Sangha, I believe a Facebook page comes up. And we're working on a website, so that will be sometime. And we're also listed off the Victoria IMS group sits. So if you're interested, you can check that out. And we do have an email. It's pocsangha@gmail.com. And we welcome any Black, Indigenous, and POC folks who would like to sit in meditation and in community to join us. And if you have any questions, to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Silas. Be well.
I really enjoyed reconnecting with my friend Farheen in this conversation. I hope you enjoyed our discussion, and if you want to learn more about Farheen's work or the Sweet Refuge Sangha, I'll post some links in the show notes at awakenrelationship.com. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. And if you have ideas for future episodes, send me a note. So until next time, stay connected.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Awake in Relationship. If you liked what you heard, please click subscribe to get the latest show delivered fresh to your device or sign up for our newsletter at awakeinrelationship.com. Sharing is caring.